Hey, software developers, what is going on? This is episode 30. I'm the Savage Coder, and today we're going to get to something that I've been putting off for a while, which is how to get these secrets out of your code, how to set up your environment so that it works in local development, in QA, in staging, in production. What we want to do here is we want to set up our code so that when I move it off of my local laptop and I put it out in QA for testing, that it's going to connect to the QA database, not try to connect back to my laptop. It's going to use the resources in QA and those servers in QA. It's going to use the secret keys to create the tokens in QA versus local. And again, all that again when it goes to staging and then eventually to production so that it can use all the things it's supposed to and everything is pointing to the right place. So not quite as exciting as a regular episode where we're going to bring in some new round-trip technology or whatever, but it's something you need to know and something you're going to need for every single job you get. And even if you create something on your own that you're really proud of and you want to just put it out there for people to see, you're going to need this stuff for that too. So otherwise you're going to be going through code, changing hard-coded values, you miss one, you pull your hair out, this happens, you don't want any of that, right? All right, so before we jump in, there's this. All right, so let's get started. Let's jump into the API code for C#, and we'll start there and see what we can do. So the first thing I want to focus on is how to make a setting that can change per environment. Right now, if we look in our appsettings.json, there's this default logger here that I don't usually use because I use a different logging technology when it's up to me. There's this allowed hosts, which, as you saw in the last video, this is for cores. Currently not using it. And then nested, if we expand this appsettings.json here, there's this appsettings.development.json. And so that is, and if you get this, you can just hit yes. That allows you to override certain settings from your regular appsettings.json. So the way I want you to think about it is there is an appsettings.json that is like a global, let's call that production, okay? And then inside each of the appsettings.environment.json is the settings that are specific to that environment. So if we flip environments from dev to staging to production or whatever other environments you have, you'll be able to just automatically pick those up. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to get rid of everything inside appsettings.json except the outer curly braces, because this is a JSON file, so empty braces is valid JSON. Same thing inside our settings for development. But we want more than that. I'm going to right click my project here and I'm going to go to add. Oh, my new item is off the screen. I just got a widescreen monitor on ultra wide and I have the recording here set up to just do this portion of the screen. Unfortunately, it doesn't really respect the bounds, so I'm going to have to shrink this just for a second, just so you can see stuff. If I right click here and go to add, now you can kind of see it over here. Let's get rid of me, but I'm going to go down to class here at the bottom. And then in the search box, I'm just going to type app settings. And there's already this app settings file option I'm going to select, and I'm going to change the name to appsettings.qa.json. And so now I've got a development, a QA, and a production. And if you want a staging, you can add, appsettings.staging.json. You really can add as many as you want in here. There is built-in support for only the regular development, staging, and I think that's it. But I usually start off with development, QA, and prod, and if there is a staging environment available, then I'll add one for that as well. So let me get this back to full size here. If we look through our code, I'm going to go to this repository for the user repository. You remember we have a SQL Server connection string that's here, and this is just looking at server localhost. Well, that's good for dev, but when we get into production, it's going to be pointing at a different SQL server. So the value for the SQL connection needs to change depending on what environment it's in. If it's a QA, there's a QA SQL server. If it's prod, there's a prod SQL server. On top of that, in our authentication service, we have this JWT signing key. We don't want this in here. This is, if you have this, you can break the whole system here. So, and this JWT signing key is going to be different in every environment. The key that we generate here for development will be known to developers, but we don't want any of our developers to know what the actual signing key is in production, because that would be a security risk. Too many people know about it, and so we try to limit that. So I want to move both of these things into a place that we can read them when we need them, but they're going to change depending on what environment we're in. So as a simple test, what we're going to do is we're going to go into our ping controller, and we're going to make some changes here. What we're going to do is we're going to add another just temporary action to our controller. And we're just going to call it, we'll call it /settings. So when you call /settings, it'll give you a response, and that response will be some value from our settings. So first, let's go and add a value for all of our settings, and the value I'm going to choose is going to be my SQL connection, my connection string. Okay. So what I want to do is I want to create a setting in here in development, appsettings.development.json, and I want to basically have something called, call this connection string, and the value is going to be that value. We want the value to be in quotes. And what is all this? This is not good. Something got all janky. There we go. So that's my connection string. But really, I'd like to group my settings so that all of my database settings are together, all of my maybe encryption settings are together, things like that. Like if you're interested in what the key is for JWT signing key, you're probably not interested in the SQL connection string at the same time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make objects that we can populate automatically from our configuration. So we have to make a configuration that looks like our object. So how would that look? I can go into models, and I'm just going to right click and add, here we go again. I'm just going to add class again. And my class is going to be called, we'll call it database settings. Right? And database settings will have a property, so public string connection string get set. Right? So it's got one property called connection string that can store a connection string. So really, if I want this class to be modeled by this connection string, there's my property right there. So I can do the same thing with database settings in JSON, and I can just say I've got database settings, and database settings is an object that has this property, right? So here's my object, and it has one object property called connection string. And if we wanted to store more things, let's say there was something else for maybe a Mongo database that had maybe like port, you could put port and then, 456 on there. And then you would just go back to this database settings and you would add, public int port and then, get set. And that would work fine, right? So, but we don't need port, so I'm going to undo that. So let's just simulate this database setting that says, well, when we're in production, we want the server to be, we'll just make something up and we'll just call it, I'll put it in caps so it's easy to see, prod server, right? And then in QA, we'll erase what's there, and we will put, instead of localhost, we'll put QA server. And the idea is that when I read this connection string, if I'm in QA, we'll see the word QA server. If we're in development, you'll just see localhost because that's local here. And then for prod, you'll see prod server when we're in app settings. So that's cool. And we have an object model now to read those settings. So all we've got to do is map those settings in our startup, and we'll be able to use them and consume them in other places. So if we jump over to startup.cs and we go down into our configure services, I'll just go after our authentication, but maybe before controllers here. And we're just going to read in the configuration sections. Now, configuration has already been set up for us by startup. If you don't have this constructor for whatever reason, you can just add this startup constructor, and iConfiguration will automatically be injected and set into this read-only property. So we can use configuration out of the box. So if we go right here, and I want to grab this section inside here, right? So I want to say read me the whole database settings section, which will include all of the properties in that section. So if I just say that my DB settings, we'll call it DB settings, let's call it section, is equal to configuration dot get section. And then in that section, we have to give it the name of our section, which in our case is database settings. So I'm just going to paste that in there, and that will grab all of those as an iConfiguration section. And so once we read in that section from our database settings, we now need to map this connection string and the value to the object that we made that's called database settings. Remember this little entity class here. Okay. So all we have to do to set that up is just tell the services, hey, configure this for me. And what I want you to do is I want you to grab a database settings class, which we'll have to bring in, right? So I'll put in the usings for API models. And then we just have to pass it the section, which we got on the line above. It's this DB settings section. And that's it. That's all there is to it. So now we have used injection, dependency injection, so that we can read that section, assign it to a database settings, and it uses an underpinning system called iOptions. And iOptions will hold a generic version of all of the settings so we can tell it which one we want. And what I mean by that is if we go into our ping controller, we can bring the settings into this ping controller. So I'm going to add a constructor. I'm going to do that the shorthand way with CTOR and then hit tab twice. And so that makes me a constructor. And what I want to inject here is an iOptions. And now we give it the type of our class, which is our database settings. And then we just give that a name, and we'll call those DB settings. So now we have to bring in iOptions. Come on. From Microsoft extensions.options. And database settings it already knows about because we've already got our models in there anyway. And now I'm just going to make a variable to hold those. So I'm just going to make a private read-only. And I don't want iOptions. I actually want a database settings. And I want to call it _DB settings. And now I'm just going to assign this DB settings to this DB settings. So just store in DB settings my DB settings. Well, if I just do that, it's going to give me an error that it can't convert an iOptions of database settings. But the reason we pass this database settings into the iOptions is this sets the generic type for DB settings.value. So if I look at dot, you see value is there. Value is a database setting, which is what I'm trying to store up here. So we actually want to grab the value. And now when I call _DB settings dot, where I need it, let's say down here, I can say the value of the connection string, I'll just shorten that to constring, is, and then in here I can just do _DB settings dot, and connection string is there for me because in the database settings I have my connection string. Right, so let's go through that one more time from beginning to end just to make sure. So I set up in my appsettings.json a database settings section with a connection string, one for prod, one in the development one, and one in the QA one. And so I'm going to read in the database settings in my startup. And so I tell configuration, get me the database settings section for the correct environment, right? It's going to know which one of these to get, and I'll show you how to switch those. But grab the section for the correct environment that we're in, and then populate a database settings object based on those setting properties. And when I call iOptions in a constructor, you'll know how to give me the database settings I need. And so I went into the ping controller, and I said, give me an iOptions of database settings, and it automatically grabs the values from our JSON, populates the object, and passes it in under .value. So we just grab the value and assign it, and now we have the object fully populated with the connection string. So let's not touch anything. I need to rename this, by the way, to something other than get, because I used get for my ping below. So we'll just call this get settings, but still in, not get settings. We're still just going to call /settings in Postman. So let's fire this up and see what happens. And I'm going to bring in my Postman, and we're going to call /settings. And if I send, the response is the value of the constring is server equal localhost. So it automatically grabbed the value from .development.json. Well, how did it know I'm in development? It knows because of environment variables. We can go into our properties, and I'm using VS 2022, so this might be different. They did change this. But if you go into search properties and just type env for environment, you can open this launch profile UI. And if you scroll down to the third one where it says environment variables, you can comma separate your own environment variables, and you can see that this environment, ASP.NET Core underscore environment, that is a reserved name that .NET Core knows about. It automatically sets it to development. If I wanted to change that and say, make that QA, and run this again, then when I hit send, you can see we're now getting the QA version of our connection string back. Oops, I just closed Postman. Oop. We'll let that relaunch while we go here. Also notice that Swagger did not get created here because in our Swagger gen in our startup, we're only doing that if we are in development mode. So if we go back now and we change QA to production and run it, then, oops, default settings. Then you can see that the server is now prod server. So we control our environment with environment variables. We can do that in here. You can do that actually in Windows itself. There's a bunch of different ways to get to it. If you right-click this PC and go to Properties, it'll open this dialog here, and you can get to Advanced System Settings here. And that will pop up this box where you can see environment variables. If you click that button, then there are variables that are set just for me, and there are others that are set for system-wide. So you would probably want to go into system-wide here. And so if I added, let's go back to our launch profile here, and I'm going to put this back to development, but I'm going to copy the name of this environment variable, and if I put new and put the variable name and put QA in here, okay, so QA is here. And I'm going to leave this one open. A lot of times it won't pick this up unless you restart Visual Studio, so we'll see what we get here first. And I can also show you what the override is. So we have our system level environment variable set to QA, and we have our Visual Studio variable set to development, and we get the development one. And that's because Visual Studio will always override. Just know that this environment variable will work when you deploy to a server like IIS or another Windows server, or if you're on a Linux or Unix based or Mac. They have their own ways of setting environment variables, so you can look that up, but the name and the values are the same. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this one because I don't want it set system wide. That's good for deploying somewhere, but not while you're developing. All right. So now that we have that, there's one other use case I want to show you, which is user secrets. And so one thing I don't want to do is I don't want to put in actual prod server credentials here, right? If it's not a trusted connection, I would actually have the name and the password right here. And that would be dangerous. That wouldn't be something you want to check into source control. And also, if you look at the authentication keys, like this WT signing key, that's nothing that I want to put in any of these. Although you could argue that development could be known, but it's just safer to not let anybody have access to these. And so what we would do is we would set these in an environment variable like in Windows so that we wouldn't have to have them here in code. And so if we want to do that, but we don't want to set, that would cause a problem across projects because I might have a JWT signing key in this project, and it might be a different key in development in another project. So when we deploy it, we would put it in an environment variable, whether it's in the cloud or we could use Azure Key Vaults, things like that. But for local development, we can take these things and we can put them in a thing called user secrets. If we right-click our project here, you see this manage user secrets. And so if we click that, we get this JSON file. And this is, you can just think of this as like a secret JSON settings file. It works exactly like these other app settings files, but this is not, the value is on your hard drive, but it's not part of your code tree. So it'll never get saved in source control. So if we want to save this JWT signing key, what I can do is I can make a section called, let's call it crypto. And then I'm going to call it JWT signing key. And I'm going to put the value, this exact value, in here. And now I need to make a model called crypto. Let's call it crypto settings. Right? And so we'll do crypto settings and JWT signing key. So I'm going to make a new model. I'm going to add a class. And I'm going to call it crypto settings. And then I just need one property in there called JWT signing key. So public string JWT signing key. And that's it. That's all that goes in there. Okay. So now I need to go back to my startup to have it read that in. So same exact, I can basically copy and paste these. And I can then make this crypto settings, because that's the name of our section, right? Just copy and paste it, make sure I didn't mess it up. And this is going to be crypto settings section, which gets passed in here. And this is no longer database settings. It's crypto settings. And that's it. So now if we go into our ping controller, let's say the value of the key is, and now I'm going to bring in, we can bring them both in, although I'm not using them both at the same time, but just to show you how this works, this time I'm going to bring in an I options of crypto settings. And we'll call that, we'll call those crypto settings, private, read only, crypto settings, and then we just have to set underscore crypto settings to crypto settings dot value. And now we can use crypto settings dot, there is no connection string in crypto settings, but there is the JWT signing key. So same exact thing we just did. It's just now we're passing in the crypto settings, and if all goes well, it should pick that up from our secrets.json. So let's bring this guy back in and call it again, and it did grab it from the correct place. Nice. So now we really are kind of set up. Now that we've tested this all out with ping, we really just need to kind of do this stuff to start hiding all these values. I don't want my JWT signing key in my app settings, so we'll just leave that in our user secrets file. And we just have to remember when we deploy that that has to go, right? That we have to set that environment variable in another server when it runs. We will leave this connection string to be set by our production ops team, and they'll know the actual credentials and connection string for the production database. So really we could just leave that whatever or leave it blank, you know, as no value, because we don't really know the value. Like you could say like, you know, ops to change in prod and just leave it at that. And then same thing for QA, where we might not know the QA server. We could just say, you know, ops to change in QA. And everybody has a different mechanism for how they like to do this. And that way for development, we have our connection string there and we have our user settings. So let's go through and make it work. So authentication service, we're going to get rid of this, right? So let's, in our constructor here, we're going to have an I options of I options of crypto settings. So we'll have to bring in I options, and we'll have to bring in our models. And that needs a name, so we'll call that crypto settings. So we're going to make a private read-only crypto settings, and then in here we just have to do crypto settings equal crypto settings.value. And so now wherever we were using that JWT signing key, we just need to add crypto settings dot JWT signing key. And so that's that. Now we can get this out of here completely. And as long as you set up your user secrets, that should come in and work just fine. And then for the database, for the repo, everywhere that there's a SQL connection, we need to make a constructor. So ctor tab, we'll add, let's do it the other way because it's a little easier. So we'll do private read-only database settings. We'll call it database settings. We will bring in the model, and then we can kind of get that little generate constructor, add parameter. I think it's that one. Yep. Okay, so now we've got our database settings. And so we just want to use that dot connection string wherever we see that. Okie doke. So now that connection string is there. And the nice thing about that is it will be the correct connection string for the environment we're in. So I'm just going to search with Shift Control F. And I'm going to search in files for SQL connection paren, because that's where I had my connection string, and I just want to look at every other file and see if there are others I can replace. There are. So I'm going to copy this guy because that's the most of it. And we'll go to this one. I really should just be able to bring that in and then just generate a whole constructor. Yep, with everything. So then here I can get rid of this and just do database settings dot connection string. Why? Oh, there it goes. It was just a little slow. Here's another one. So this one we're all set up. So I just have to do database settings dot connection string. And so you can see it's a lot easier. It makes your code cleaner too, right? And I think that's it. So the other place, I think in our startup, we have our JWT signing key. So let's see where we're using that. Should light up an error. There it is. So we have to worry about the order of things. We're not reading our crypto settings in until we get down here and we're using it above. So I think we have to do this first. So rather than have some of our config in one place, I want to move both of them so they stay together, and we're just going to put it right above this guy, just for now. And then, since I already have my settings section, see, we can't really set up injection here in the startup because we're not even configuring the injection until inside this method. So the class is already created. So I think the best way for us to get it is we already have the section right here. So this is one of those cases where I think the best way to do it would be to just put the section, and then we can put the key inside the section. And the key, let's see, the key is this key. So that just goes in quotes. Let me, just to make sure, I'm just going to paste. So I'm going to add the quotes. And so if we put a breakpoint, I'll just put a breakpoint right here and start it up. We'll make sure that we're able to read our user settings at this point. So I'm just going to grab that, and we'll go into our immediate window here. And I'm just going to paste crypto settings section with that. Yeah, so it is reading it already. So we're good there. And again, we're kind of forced to do this just in the startup. Every place else would be fine. Services are not able to be constructed. Let's see if that's a real thing or if that's just a hiccup. Just try it again. Yeah, we have a problem here. Some services are not able to be constructed. Product service, unable to resolve service type. Okay. Not sure what that's about, but let's figure it out. So let's look at what the product service is relying on. Okay, so in order to make a product service, we need a products repository. And in the products repository, we did make a change. We added this database setting. No. What broke? Okay, I know what happened. Leave it to incorrect code generation. So sometimes this stuff is not what you want. My constructor here that creates the product service, which creates a products repository. We don't want a database settings here being injected. This has to be an I options. And the only reason that was there is because I let it build this constructor. And so now we've got to add .value, and that should fix that. Let's check the other places that we made changes. Authentication service does I options, that's fine. User repository, here's another one. I options. dot value. May as well check the other constructors while we're here. We just looked at that one. Okay, so that should set us. So there is no more settings because I reset that ping. But we can test it out with our React code. npm start. We should still be able to get to our database. And that'll show us that everything works perfect. Not looking right so far. Let's inspect there. Well, it got a token. And the products is pending. Are we on a breakpoint? I did have a breakpoint. Yeah, that's what it is. Let me get that breakpoint out of there. There we go. So it is working. I just had a breakpoint I need to move. So very cool. So what we learned today was how to set up our different environments and how to take all of our settings and put them into places where they're either secret and out of the way, or that it's just in a nice configurable place. Sometimes you want to make a little flag in your app that, you know, is easy to turn on and off. Maybe you want to test a feature and you only want it showing up in development and QA. So you set that setting on in those environments, but off in production so that you can continue testing it while your production releases remain unaffected. So app settings are really great for all that kind of stuff. Hopefully you learned a whole bunch and you saw me struggle a little bit with sometimes when things don't go as expected. It happens to everybody, and you just kind of work the problem and try and figure out what the issue is and move on. So if you found this helpful, please subscribe. Ask me any questions at the social media links below, or you can get the code in the description as well. And let me know if I can help you with anything. Leave comments. Let me know what you want to learn. Even if it's something I don't know, if I find it really compelling, we could switch gears for a week or two and see what we come up with. So let me know, and good luck, and practice, practice, practice. And I'll see you soon online.